Okay, I think we'll just jump in and I'll kind of let people trickle in. We have a small group. Um, might make for some interesting conversation. Yeah, so welcome to the second event of Love Your Body Week at Portland State University. My name is Maya. I use she, her pronouns. And our talk today is going to be focusing on the intersection of food systems and fat liberation, guided by Chef Fresh. So I'll let Chef Fresh do kind of a more detailed introduction, but just to give some overview, Chef Fresh is the founder of Fresher Together, the director of Chicago Bread Club, and a proud board member of Howard Brown Health and Transformative Justice Law Project. Fresher Together is a collaborative food and farming project for healing, economic development, training, and retreat. Fresh strives to make nutritious and nourishing food accessible to all and is committed to building access, pleasure, and accessible, quality, affirming healthcare for all, centering BIPOC, queer, gender nonconforming, trans, and fat folks. So Fresh, if you want to kind of take it away, go for it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And thanks for inviting me to be here this week. I'm so excited. I wanted to, I'll talk a little bit about myself and my work, but I kind of wanted this to be a discussion. So Erin, I think you're the main person here tonight or today. So, we'll have a conversation if you're down for it. And you can ask me questions or guide what direction this goes today. But so I'll introduce myself a little bit more. So I'm Fresh or Chef Fresh. I use they, them, and she, her pronouns. I am originally from Eastern North Carolina, but I currently live in Chicago and I've been here for about 20 years. I'm the grandchild of sharecroppers. And so my grandparents and my mom, they grew up on a farm where they produce four main crops: corn, tobacco, peanuts, and cotton. And so my mom talks about how she ran away from the farm and doesn't understand why I'm running toward this work. But I feel something beyond myself that is a calling toward this work. And so I'm currently in Chicago and doing the work here. And so I'll talk a little bit about kind of what I'm doing here now. But I always like to distinguish that I'm from Eastern North Carolina. And so folks who are fans of barbecue, it's important to know that Eastern North Carolina's barbecue is vinegar based and does not have any tomato products. So it's smoky and it's good and tangy, unlike, Western North Carolina, who has tomatoes and things in their barbecue. And then when you talk about South Carolina, they have like mustard and everything in their barbecue. So it's a very good distinction. Plus, we're near the ocean versus Western North Carolina, which is near the Bent Mountains, which are both great, but I'm definitely a water baby. So I'm trying to think other things that are important to know about me besides all the traditional bio stuff is that I am a Scorpio. I'm a Leo rising and a Virgo moon. So if that means things to you, you can, think about all those things. I like to think of myself as when the zombie apocalypse happens, you want me on your team. I have a lot of skills around growing food and building things and all of those things. So I'm a pretty good team member for the zombie apocalypse. And my love language is acts of service. And so a lot of the work that I do and the way my work shows up is as acts of service because I love my community. And so how I do this work often shows up in being of service to my people and my community. So I think that's a little bit of an intro about me. I'll talk a little bit about my work and things that I do now. So I'm a farmer, I'm a chef, I do a lot of community rooted food systems work and all of that kind of grounded in making things accessible and things pleasurable. And so welcome. is a small group today. So I'm going to talk a little bit, but we'll really guide this discussion by questions. So whenever you want to throw something in the chat, that'll kind of, be there. Or even if you want to come off mute, because I think we're such a tight knit group. And so, a lot of my work centers around access. And I think about that not only for fat bodies and large bodies, but for differently able bodies, for folks with all types of access needs. And so a lot of the work I do make space for folks of all abilities, all needs, all bodies to show up, and especially to show up in this work that is often very informed by kind of healthist ideas, right? Like these very specific ideas around what is good, what is bad as far as food, how people have to show up to this work. Farming and stewarding the land can often be a very labor intensive work. And so if, you don't have the mobility to do this work, oftentimes people don't make space for you. And so the way I work tries to make space for everyone and have space for everyone to connect to the land and have access to food and all of those things. And so I'll talk a little bit about kind of what I do, and we can also have some questions and stuff from folks who want to get into this conversation more. But so each week I've been doing a lot more growing and less cooking. The way my life usually used to look is a lot more cooking and less growing. And so I'm starting to shift that a little bit. But since the pandemic, one of the main things I do for cooking is a mutual aid project that we started back in May of 2020. And so we cook every Wednesday. So tomorrow's our day. We cook hot, delicious meals for our community members. So we get people's dietary restrictions. We know what they can and they can't have. We know how many folks are in their family. We get donations from farms and local entities, and then we purchase the other things we need. And we cook these scratch-based meals. And every week, we started in the beginning of the pandemic cooking 50 each week, and now we cook 350 each week. And so there's me and 3 other chefs, some farmers and community members helping to organize it. And we distribute to families every week 350 hot meals. And so that is our main mutual aid cooking thing that I'm up to these days. And I love that work because it's really informed about what our community and what our neighbors say they need, what things they're allergic to or they can't have. If people have dietary restrictions around salt or sugar or any of those types of things where they can't have those, we honor those and are able to keep track of those. And then also, it started out of folks being homebound, a lot of elders who couldn't get out, or folks who, lost their jobs during the pandemic. And so, or people who were working in very high risk situations. And so people who were starting to contract COVID. And so, each time, we were able to adjust and shift and bend based on what people in our community needed and what they needed as far as access. So that is a lot of the cooking that I do each week. We call that Project Farm Food and Familias. And then outside of the cooking, a lot of what I do is farming and growing. And so I grow in the city of Chicago. There are a lot of vacant lots and land here in the city, and I grow on the south side of the city. And so in Chicago, the city is very much divided, based really racially and income wise. So on the south side of the city and on the west side of the city, that's often where most of the Black and brown folks live. And there's a lot of empty lots, abandoned, vacant lots, a lot of sites that were the home to manufacturing at one point. And so where I currently farm is in this area that is across from Steelworkers Park, which is a heavy industry space here in Chicago. And it's been remediated. And I farm on a larger farm that's about 7 acres and have a small plot of that and it's been remediated and filled with landfill. And that's where we grow. We grow above the ground and build our beds above the ground. I farm a little less than a quarter of an acre there. And so when people come to our farm, you know, we do work differently. So depending on how you're feeling in your body, there's seated tasks, there's pretty stationary tasks, there's really like labor intensive tasks. If you want to sweat and move, you can haul wheelbarrows of compost and wood chips and weed and do all of those things. But we try to make space for everyone to be able to feel included and be able to have access to the space and connect with the land. Because for me, I find that to be a very healing practice personally. And so I think about like how to make sure that other folks have space and capacity to participate in that. So those are two of the pieces of stuff that I do, really rooted around farming and the cooking. And then a lot of our work we do in collaboration with other folks. And so, you know, we have community fridges here that I have one outside of my house where we've turned our front lawn into a community garden. And then we have a community fridge where people can leave things that they want to leave or take things as they want to take it. And we fill it with produce from the garden. We fill it with all types of stuff. The other day, I'm also a big advocate for local grain and having access to local grain and staple crops and beans. So the other day we filled it with like local pancake mix from a farmer that I know and local brand muffin mix. It's often, you know, people will add all types of things to the fridge that they love, and it does not stay full long. So there's, you know, there's space for cold and refrigerated items. And then we have kind of a built-in pantry where there's space for canned items or dry goods. The other day when I was coming home, there was sugar, and there hardly ever is sugar. And so someone was super excited that there was finally sugar and they were like filling up their bags. And so, you know, so that is another thing that we do. And so I think a lot of it is really rooted in creating multiple points for access and choice, and for people to really name what they need and have like a lot of autonomy and what they need and how they can care for themselves. And then having space where people can show up and feel welcome and included at the table and at the conversation, which feels super important to me because often that space doesn't exist in food systems work, right? And doesn't exist, especially, I think when people talk about, you know, I live in a neighborhood where up until recently, we hadn't had a grocery store for 8 years. And so finally, we just got a grocery store back kind of early in the pandemic that finally came back to our neighborhood. But in spaces like this, we refer to them as food apartheid. Some people say food deserts or other food insecure, all of these different things. There often are people who want to come in to the neighborhood and name what we need and name what is the solution to like not having access to food. And oftentimes they do that in a way that is demonizing and shaming of certain types of food, you know, especially like types of food that poor folks have access to. It's often like shaming and adding stigma to certain bodies that folks inhabit. And so the way, you know, we try to do this work and move about this work is without all of that, right? So we don't have good foods and bad foods, right? We have food, right? And we want folks in our community to have choice and access to food, period, right? And so I think about the way our neighborhood looks as far as choice, and then how the neighborhood looks that's downtown in the city looks, right? And so there's every choice downtown. There's grocery stores, there's farmers markets, there's gardens, there's fast food restaurants and drive-throughs, there's sit down to eat spots. There's just a plethora of choice, right? And so, and in my neighborhood, it doesn't look like that at all, right? We have access to a very limited amount of things. And then we get this false narrative that we have a choice but out of a very small pool of options. And so a lot of the things I think about is how to expand that choice, how to give people a real sense of choice in that work. I think, are we sweet? Okay, good. I was just trying to make sure that everyone could see for the interpreter. So yeah, so that is a piece of the work. I feel like I'm talking about a few different things. So I want to make sure if there's any questions or anything, or, okay, great. So yeah, so I think that's a lot of the work that I do, and the work that you know, a lot of how my work is rooted. And I think about it in this space of having a reimagined view of, or a non-traditional, I would say, maybe, view on what it is, this concept of health, this concept of you know, I'll just start with the concept of health, right? And so when I think about that, I feel like there's a very narrow-minded view of what folks refer to as health and what folks refer to as healthy, and it often is there often is a very limited scope of that doesn't have a full view, right? It doesn't mean much, actually. You know, it just doesn't feel like it means much. And so you know, people might say, you know, something like, oh, whole grains are healthy. And, you know, maybe they are, but, you know, maybe if you have a gluten intolerance or allergy or some restrictions to that, then that's not healthy for you. You should probably not have whole grains, you know, or, you know, or, you know, there's plenty of things like that. I used to do a lot of cooking for elders who some of them had like diverticulitis, and so, you know, like, me giving them quinoa and very small grain things or anything that was seeds, and it didn't work for them, and it didn't work for their body. And so I try to think about, like, not, when we're trying to make space for everyone, how do we not have these kind of these empty language words that don't mean a whole lot of anything, right? Or that exclude people often for whatever we're saying is the common language of what they mean. And so, you know, thinking about that, you know, I often adopt, like, what do I think about when I think about health? And I do these check-ins with myself, and I think about, like, well-being. So we do these check-ins that we like to call pies, because, you know, pies are delicious and they're great. And if you're mathematical, then pie is also great there too. But it gives us a sense of kind of like this more holistic space of checking in. So we think around, like, our physical, how we're doing physically, how we're doing for our I intellectually, how we're doing for our E emotionally. And then we spell our pies with a lot of S's. So it could be spiritual, social, sexual, or whatever other S you like to throw on there. And so when I think about that kind of holistic view of well-being or health, it allows space to include a lot more folks in that conversation, and think about, how are we serving community? How are we serving and taking care of ourselves in this way that checks in with all those kind of marks and with our holistic selves? And so that's a lot of piece of kind of how we approach our work and how we make space for folks. Yeah, I'm babbling. I wanna be in conversation with folks, or let's talk about some things that people want to talk about or have questions around. Yeah, or I can talk more, but yeah.
I'd be interested in hearing a little bit about how you came to this work. And what drew you to it?
Yeah. Yeah, so sometimes I don't even know. Like, I feel like it was a calling that was beyond myself. But one thing that I did have a shift around is when I first came to Chicago. I actually came to a town just north of Chicago called Evanston. And I was coming here for school. So I had moved and left North Carolina, and I came here from school. And it was my first time like this far away from home by myself. Like, I didn't know anyone here. I didn't have any family or anything here. So it was kind of my first time away. And at some point during my freshman year, it's like, I'm going to make pecan pie. And so I went to the grocery store and I was like, okay, I'm going to get these ingredients. Like, pecan pie reminds me of home. I'm not a huge dessert person. So pecan pie is really funny because it's super sweet and super desserty, but it was like my thing that I liked. So I was like, okay, I'm going to make pecan pie. And so I went to pick out some pecans, and it was a small, like very small package of pecans. This was like back in 2001 for reference. But actually, I don't know if the price has gone up. It feels like the price might have gone down. But there's a small package of pecans, and they were shelled, and they were like $9.99. I remember them being like almost $10. I was like, oh my goodness. And I knew that I would need multiple packs of pecans to be able to make this pie. And I just didn't know how I was going to make that happen. And it was like the first time that I can remember of things being really inaccessible for me, you know? So I think about being back home, growing up, we were really poor, but it didn't feel like we were missing anything, right? Like, my mom would make these abundant meals. We would go to the greens truck that would pull up in the Roses parking lot, this like shopping center parking lot, and this truck full of greens from a farmer, and like buy greens off the truck, and she make these big pots of greens and these fried cornbreads. Or I remember loving, she would make beans and rice and all these meals that like to me just felt abundant. And then also, like, next to my aunt's house, there was a pecan tree. We would always go and pick pecans, or I would go with my grandfather and be able to pick pecans. Or I remember times of like going and getting seconds. I didn't really understand it until looking back at it later, where the farmer would farm all the sweet potatoes. There would be all these sweet potatoes and things left in the field. We were allowed to just go and collect as much as possible. So we always had like sweet potatoes in the bottom of the like hall closets that we would like last the whole season, that we would go and get sweet potatoes from. So everything like felt like we always just had enough of these things. And so it was the first time I had realized that like pecans cost money, and way more money than I had. And so it just seemed ridiculous that this thing wasn't accessible to me. And I think that was like a spark of something that clicked for me around access around food, right? Like, oh, this isn't accessible, right? Like, you know, and I think thinking about like looking back on my life and thinking about what things my mom never let me get from the grocery store, or like all of these different things. And in the moment, it just felt like, you know, oh, my mom won't let me have sugar cereal, or oh, my mom won't let me have like this juice, or, you know, certain things like. But looking back, I'm like, oh, it was probably, you know, one financial, like maybe she had some stigma around like sugar or like something, right? But she might have had some like good food, bad food things going on. But it was probably mostly like around money and finances. But, you know, that hadn't really clicked for me before. And so I think that made a big difference for me. Like, that changed my view a bit. And so then as I navigated the world, I think, you know, I always thought I went to school for something completely different. So I was studying like engineering and physics. And I had always thought like, oh, you know, I'll just be an engineer, and then like I'll open up a restaurant or something in like 10 or 15 years, things like that. But I always found myself, even at school, doing a lot of cooking. So like if I could be in a club and I could be on the food committee, I would, you know, do that. Or I lived in a housing co-op and you had to pick chores, and I would always try to get the chef chores. Or like I would try to fundraise by catering like dorms munchies and things like that. So I was always cooking. And so, when I thought about like, oh, I'm going to just open a restaurant one day, or I'm going to work in a restaurant one day. I had thought about like doing this work where didn't want to work in a kitchen of a restaurant where I couldn't afford to eat in the dining room of. And so I always kind of had that analysis around it. And I think over time, by getting more connected with not only like different ways and different means of feeding folks, and people who are doing other types of projects around, like alternative ways to feed folks. There was a space here called Inspiration Kitchens, and they had this like living room cafe, or this like it was kind of like a reimagined soup kitchen, where you would like people would come in, but they would sit down like they were at a restaurant, and then they would order, and then like the volunteers would then, the volunteer servers would take the order over to the kitchen and put it in. And so then I would volunteer in the kitchen. And so like it would be like you're in a restaurant and you were cooking these meals for folks who are coming in. Soup, there was like a soup kitchen, but a little like different reimagined way. And so I had gotten involved with a few places like that because I knew I wanted to be involved with food, but I wanted it to look differently. And I had, worked on a small organic farm after college. And, I think there was just ways I just kept getting connected to this work. And eventually when I went to culinary school, I just kept thinking like, oh, I'm going to just be I'm going to be a community-based activist around food. I kept saying that even though I didn't know what it meant. When I got the chance to go work in kitchens, I wanted to work in kitchens where I felt like I could go work in that kitchen and bring stuff back to my community. So I heard about like Google's cafeterias and how they had like cafeterias for their employees that were like super fancy. And so I was like, how are they doing that? We can't even have good food in our schools. Like I can't even like, get fresh stuff in the schools, or get like, all of like different options. We only have one option, in school. So how are they having so many options? So I was like, okay, I'm going to go work there. I'm going to go figure these things out and see how people are doing these things differently, especially people who have money. How are they doing it? So I can figure out how we can, do this work too. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's something that shifted when I realized like, oh, I can't buy this thing. That kind of led me on this path that influenced this work. I think it gave me a different view, a different lens to see stuff through. But then I think some of it too is just being guided and led by like my ancestors in this work, right? And like I feel like there's something that sometimes feel inexplicable around it that I think is guidance from like, maybe it's from my grandparents who were sharecroppers, maybe it's from their parents who I don't really know, but there's some piece of it's like, I don't know why I need to work this land. I don't know why I'm being called to this. I don't know why I know what this plant is, even though I don't think anyone ever told me what this plant was. So there's just something that feels like a connection beyond me.
I have a question too.
Yeah.
How are some ways that you feel like your work has evolved over time, or like what are some things that you've learned as you work with different communities that would maybe be like helpful things to share if there was someone else that was like, I would love to do this type of work as well? Like what could you share with them from your experiences?
Yeah, I think there's a few things that come to mind right away. One is find your people, right? Who are you collaborating with? Who are you building with? I have notoriously been like good at trying to take everything on by myself. And that way does not work, right? Like, I don't know if other folks are like this, but I'm like, oh, I can just do it. I'll just do it. I'll take this on and I can handle it, and I can do this other thing too. And my plate is real full, right? And so I really love how we do Farm Food Familias, because, someone will ask, oh, what happens to these meals when they leave the kitchen? And I could tell you what happens to those meals when they leave the kitchen. Like, they go to another place, they're labeled, then they're packaged with an assortment of meals from the other chefs. They're put in bags. They go to the neighborhoods. The neighborhoods are grouped, like the deliveries are grouped, all of these things. And if there's a Spanish speaking family that's in this neighborhood, then that driver probably is bilingual. And, like, you know, there's all these different moving pieces. And what's felt really good about this work is I don't have to take on all of them, right? And so, like, having collaborators, having people that you're building and doing the work with, having folks that you can share the load with, is amazing. And so, like, even in the, like, earliest of thought process of, like, wanting to do a thing, I always, you know, just think about, like, who can you also tell, like, your passionate story to? Can they get on board? Who do they know who also wants to do that, so that you're doing it in collaboration with folks? Especially, it's best, you know, if it's in collaboration with folks you're serving or who you're doing work with, or, you know, all of that. So that's one thing. The other thing, I had two. I should have wrote it down. I had two that popped up in my head right away. And now I don't remember the other thing. So, my dog feels like she remembers. I'll think about it. But one is definitely collaboration and building with folks. Hold on one second. Sorry, y'all. Okay, she might be barking for a little while. I'm sorry about that. So I lost my other thought, Erin, but as soon as it comes back to me, I will let you know. But that's one of the pieces I would say is definitely find your people to collaborate with. Hold on. Okay. Maybe she's gonna stop barking for a little bit now.
I had another question. One of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is kind of the intersection of between what are considered healthy foods, good foods, and trying to hold space for a lot of different experiences and varieties there. And also, I do have the value that fresh foods that are close to the land or maybe locally grown, are better. Like, I have that value. So I have a really hard time kind of walking that line and allowing for this, like, kind of just allowing for the idea that something from, I don't know, McDonald's, and please, I eat at McDonald's, so I'm not saying like it's all bad, but that is, I want to say it's not healthy, but I also want to give space to this, everybody's got a different body and everybody's got a different experience. And so, I don't know, I just wondering if you could talk a little bit about kind of where those two ideas meet.
Yeah, definitely. I think one space I think about is, so one space I think about, which might be helpful to hold in mind to kind of make space for, like, all foods, right? Is I think about disordered eating, or folks who aren't eating, or folks who don't have access to meals, or folks who have very limited access to foods and meals, right? And so, like, if you're holding space for them, and if you're holding space in a space of like, even if you think that some things are more harmful than others, if you can hold space or have any values around harm reduction. And so if you think about those two things together, maybe it'll give you some spaciousness, right? So, like, if I'm thinking about what in your point of view is better, if we're doing it on a value scale, right? To not have access to food or to eat food, right? So like, am I going to not eat all day today because my only options are the corner store and the drive-through and like, you know, and those things? Am I going to not eat today? Or am I going to not eat today because my options are, you know, canned things? Or like, I'm trying to think of things that people might put on those value spaces, right? So am I going to not eat today because of that? Or am I going to eat meals? What's better for my body? Probably to eat food, to eat whatever food there is, and to have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, to have some snacks, and to have meals in. And if I'm thinking from a point of like, if I am living with disordered eating and I'm restrictive, what's better in that space? Like that I eat food, right? And so in that space of it's better to eat food than not eat food, right? It's better to eat you know, what I have access to than to save like some to wait until one day where I have access to like all the fresh things. Like that might be a space, the whole spaciousness. And then I think like, then if we think about and then outside of like the world of like overly processed and like there's things that I have feelings about, right? Like I'm not going to shame people for them. I have feelings about high fructose corn syrup, right? Like I just might have feelings around those, right? And I'm going to navigate space without like shaming people who want to consume that, or if I'm going to consume that, I'm not going to give myself a hard time for that. So I think about that, and then I think about like what is the slippery slope that once you start talking about this is good and this is bad, to the slope of like, then which is not a far reach, then we're demonizing all of these culturally relevant foods that are like part of people's identity and culture for years and years and years and years and years, right? And so then it's like, oh, okay, well, you can't have carbs and corn and this and that, and you know, you can't have rice and beans anymore, or you can't, you know, like those are bad foods, or those foods aren't clean. You know, it's just like it goes into like these bigger spaces, right? And so I think like I often like to be in the space of not what you can't have, but what else can I have, right? So even in the space of like, if people can't have, let's say people have diabetes, right? Or they need to like really monitor their intake of carbs and sugars and like these types of things. And so one, I like to be in that space of harm reduction, right? So like what if you like if I tell you can't have it, restriction is hard, because then when you go to have it, you're gonna really maybe overdo it in a place that like your body's gonna not feel great afterwards. But if I think of a space of like, I'm gonna have this thing because my body wants this thing, and all food is fine because like it's gonna be more nourishing to me to have this thing, then what can I do to also be helpful, right? Can I add in like okra water? What else can I add in that also will take care and nourish my body, right? And so like I think about an easy one is if I'm lactose intolerant and I really want the piece of cheese or I really want the yogurt, then maybe what's good for my body is to have a lactate, right? I'm going to have this lactate when I'm having this. Or if like I am a person whose body really reacts to nightshades, right? Like they cause me to have flare-ups sometimes, but like maybe I'm also like Italian or something, right? And I really want to have that tomato sauce that my mom makes or something, you know? Like maybe if I'm going to have the nightshades, I'm going to do some extra ginger, some extra turmeric, some extra thing that I'm also going to have that nourishes my body, right? Or maybe I'm not going to have the tomato sauce from my mom every single day. But I don't want to be shamed for having this tomato sauce because that's not helpful. And then it just makes me want this tomato sauce more. So thinking about it in those spaces might help add a little bit of spaciousness.
Can I add on to that with kind of like a follow-up question and a little
Yeah.
bit of my own thoughts? So I'm thought about this type of question a lot and heard this question a lot too. And one thing that has helped me work through that is I definitely had a lot of these thoughts, and I'm not going to say that I don't ever have them anymore, but I feel like I've made a lot of progress. And part of that has been through thinking about like nutritional value as a concept versus like healthy, because healthy can be physical, but it can also be emotionally healthy. And I think that's where a lot of the challenge sometimes, or the like conflicting feelings arise, is like eating this food is going to make me happy, which is emotionally good. Oh, I froze, I think. Can you all hear me?
Yeah, I think Fresh froze. Yeah.
Maybe back.
Okay.
Yay.
Oh, my son froze. Sorry, y'all. I don't know what just happened there.
I thought it was me. It's usually my Zoom. No, I was just saying, like, when I think of it as like nutritional value, that's a little bit more like scientific. It takes some of the emotion out of it. And so that sometimes I think is easier to understand. But I'm curious, like, what would you think of that approach? Like, when people, I really appreciated how you brought in the cultural aspect and access, which is huge. Do you feel like that is portraying a potentially helpful message, or do you see that there could be some harm even in that type of language? I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I often do that a lot too, like just thinking about strict nutrition of it. I feel like if I'm emotionally connected to my point of view, sometimes it's a little bit harder. So like, yeah, like, you know, I think that one is kind of an easy way if that's how your brain works, very like facts, science, this, you know, there's some great social media nutritionists that I follow, or scientists who are really good at being like, no, that doesn't make any sense. And, you know, sugar is sugar, and like, you know, all of those different things. So I think that like that definitely is a means that can be helpful if it works for you. I think I find that comes up a lot for me too when I think about like the quality of something, right? And so like I might want people to like this I talked about these local pancake mix that comes from this farm near us called Funk's Grove Fruit and Grain, right? It's a very small farm, and they grow this heirloom variety of wheat called Warthog, and it is like the pancakes are delicious, right? Like the pancake mix, the flour, the stuff they make is absolutely incredible, right? And so, and it is local flour. It's like I'm all about local too. I'm like, how can we support like our neighbors, right? How can I like make sure that, you know, we can support as many jobs that are nearby? But you know, a lot of people come to the conversation of like local grains and all this stuff from this, like, it's better, like this other flour is trash, and this and that, and like all of this stuff. And I think that that's a good space to be in, like nutrition, right? Like this flour and this flour, they have the same macros, like, you know, like all of these things, right? And then I can still want to, like, one of the things I'm doing is like, how do I get more Black and brown folks access to local grain? One, because supporting the local economy, but two, this pancake mix is delicious. And why should only the people who can afford it get this pancake mix and it's delicious, right? So there is like this space of like, sometimes this thing tastes better than this thing, or like having this fresh apple is amazing, or like having, you know, a good quality produce is amazing. But I do really like what Erin brought up around, like, if I think of nutritional value, if I think of like the like all the carbs and fats and protein and all of that stuff, that it might be helpful too. Yep. And here comes my dog again. My dog likes to make noise anytime anyone walks past.
I have one more question I can ask, but I don't want to take too much space if anyone else has a question that they want to ask.
Do it. It's like the two of you.
Okay.
Right? Yeah.
So this is like kind of a personal question, but I think it's relevant to this topic. So I have a kindergartner. She came home and they have these like health lessons. And one of them was like, be like healthy or something. It was like the name of the lesson. And the scenario that they presented was like, here's your breakfast options. And it was like a bowl of Cheerios and an apple, and then like chocolate donuts. And then it was like, which one should you pick? And I like died. I was like, oh my gosh, she's 5 and they're already teaching like good and bad foods. Like, so as a parent with children that are hearing these messages, I don't know, do you have any advice for how to like help combat that type of message? Like I immediately had a conversation with her and I was like, did they tell you that one was good and one was bad? And she was probably like, whoa, why are you so intense about this right now? But like, it just starts so young. And so I don't know if you have any suggestions for how to like push back against that kind of messaging in kids.
Oh man. I think that's really hard. I have discussions with my partner all the time around this type of stuff too. And we are so lucky that we have a friend who actually was the founder of like the Chicago Bread Club that, you know, I'm helping run now. And she has a daughter and she does a lot of this. She's nutritionist. She does a lot of stuff with EDs and like all this different stuff. And I just love the way her daughter's relationship to food is. And I don't know the answer to this question, but you know, one of the things, like, you know, she definitely comes from this framework of all foods fit, and like, you know, this education around like what different things do for our bodies and like how our body uses. And I think about like how our body uses vegetables, how our body uses these, and how, you know, these different things, and why our body needs carbs and why our body needs fats, and like all of these things from that point of view that it sounded like you were touching on a little bit earlier, Erin. But like her daughter also will do this check-in around like, what does my body want right now? And so, you know, sometimes she'll be like, my body wants ice cream, you know, or like, my body wants this right now. And like, you know, they have a thing where they do a check-in and like, she'll have an ice cream and she'll check in. It's like, you know, does my body want something else right now? And like, you know, and all of that. And sometimes, you know, that looks like we ate this burger at breakfast, you know, or sometimes it looks like something else. But I always appreciate that for like how like she's developing her daughter's relationship with food, and really like also this understanding that I feel like sometimes, and I feel like we do this to lots of folks, right? To children, because we think they don't understand, so we tell them what they have to eat. Or to poor folks, right? Like I think about like how people push on like my neighborhood what we should be having because they know better, right? Than like people know. And I think that there's like a combination of like people know what they need, and if you educate them around stuff, people really have like the informed space to make a choice, right? Like if like, you know, I get to know that my body does certain things with vegetables, or, you know, and I don't know what the age is. And then that, I know there's probably lots of people who are doing like this kind of intuitive eating and like this kind of accessible nutrition space for everyone who probably who have like a lot more like a lot like more data informed response to this around like children a certain age and all that stuff. But I think that like what I think is really great when people give their children or give folks like this autonomy to be like to understand, right? To even offer them information and things that they have capacity to handle at certain ages, and then their space to make a choice, or like, you know, all of that. Any more questions? I was trying to think of what I was going to say earlier, Erin, when you asked me that question earlier, and two things immediately popped into my head, and now the second one still never came back. But yeah.
No worries. No worries. It happens to me all the time. I have to write everything down.
Yeah.
I have to pop out early, but I just wanted to say thank you so much. I really appreciate hearing all the work you do and learning from you. So thank you.
Thank you. I think you're popping out on time because it's almost up, right?
Almost. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Yeah, we just have a couple more minutes. I guess I'm curious if there's anything like, obviously we have your information. I'm curious if you have other resources, or just places to go for helpful information about all the things that you've talked about today, that we can share with the community.
Yeah. I can also send some things up if you're creating a resource guide. I saw some of the people y'all have coming up this week, so I know you're gonna have some amazing speakers and some amazing folks. But yeah, and then people can always follow me, and I'm trying to do a little bit better of a job on social media and posting. So on Instagram, I think my main handle is Chef Fresh 82, and then there's also Fresher Together. And Chicago Bread Club if folks want to follow that. But yeah, I can also send over some resources and some things that might be amazing too.
Cool.
Yeah.
I want that pancake mix.
Oh yeah.
Cool. Well, I mean, Erin, do you have any other questions? Or Chef Fresh, do you have any like final thoughts or anything?
No, I mean, I could definitely keep talking for sure, but I'm good. I don't have any specific questions.
Yeah. Well, thanks for inviting me to have this conversation. This was fun. And I appreciate being able to come and have conversations with y'all. And then I'm always reachable. So like, if you think of any other questions that like I specifically can help with or anything, like I'm for real. Like I know sometimes people say that and then don't really mean contact them, but feel free to contact me or reach out.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for your time and your insight. It's really interesting. Thank you, Erin, for attending.
Yes, thank
thanks.
you.
Sorry I didn't turn my video on. I'm a little sick, so I'm like lounging.
No worries.
But this was great. Thank you very much.
All right. Y'all have a good one.
Thank
Bye.
you. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.